Everyone, and welcome to the Livable Places Action Committee meeting. It is 3 o'clock on Tuesday, February 8th, 2022. I'm co-chair Sonny Garza of the Livable Places Action Committee, and I call this meeting officially to order as a virtual meeting using Microsoft Teams. Please mute yourself and turn off your camera during the meeting. If you are joining via telephone, please use *6 to mute and unmute yourself during the meeting. Committee members, if you would like to speak during the meeting, please use the raise your hand feature or unmute and state your name so that you may be recognized by the chair. And a reminder to those of you who are in attendance who are not subcommittee members, the raise your hand option is not available to you, but please feel free to put your information in the chat and we will be called on at the appropriate time. Committee members, when I call your name, please respond by saying your last name, then present. Co-chair Sonny Garza is present. Co-chair Lisa Clark.
Present. Clark, present.
Good afternoon, Lisa. Welcome back. Great to have you.
Thank you, Sonny. I appreciate it.
Of course. Bradley Pepper is not present. Casey Morgan. Casey Morgan is not present. Curtis Davis. Curtis Davis is not present. Dr. Sherry Smith.
Smith present.
Sherry Smith is present. Thank you. Dustin O'Neill. Dustin O'Neill is not present. Sean Masick. Sean Masick is not present. Fernando Zamaripa. Fernando Zamaripa is not present. Jeff Kaplan. Jeff Kaplan. Jeff Kaplan is not present. Kathy Payton. Kathy Payton is not present. Kirby Liu. Kirby Liu is not present. Lloyd Smith. Lloyd Smith is not present. Luis Guajardo. Luis Guajardo is not present. Mark Nightingale. Mark Nightingale is not present. Matthew Camp.
Camp present.
Matthew Camp is present. Thank you. Megan Ziegler.
Ziegler present.
Megan Ziegler is present. Mike Dishberger. Mike Dishberger is not present. Neil Dykeman.
Present.
Neil Dykeman is present. Omar Isfar. Omar Isfar is not present. Peter Friedman. Peter Friedman is not present. Sandy Stevens.
Stevens present.
Sandy Stevens is present. Thank you. Scott Kubler.
Scott Kubler present.
Scott Kubler is present. Thank you. Steve Curry.
Curry present.
Steve Curry is present. Toby Cole. Toby Cole is not present. Tyron McDaniel.
McDaniel present.
McDaniel is present. Thank you, sir. Johanna Mahmoud. Johanna Mahmoud is not present. Zion Escobar.
Escobar present.
Escobar is present. I count 11 subcommittee members in attendance. If any of the subcommittee members have joined us during the roll call and missed your name, please state so now for the record. Okay, one at a time or try.
Jeff Kaplan.
Jeff Kaplan is present. Thank you.
Peter Friedman.
Peter Friedman is present. Thank you.
Curtis Davis.
Curtis Davis is present. Thank you.
Fernando Zamaripa.
Fernando Zamaripa is present. Thank you. Anyone else?
This is Alvin Pickens with Metro City and for Johanna Mahmoud.
Johanna Mahmoud, present. Thank you. Anyone
Alvin
else?
Pickens for
And-
Johanna.
Anne Rosenwinkel.
And Rosenwinkel, thank you. Any other subcommittees in attendance at this point? All right, hearing none, I have a count of 16 subcommittee members. Thank you so very much for attending today. Again, for all of you who are in attendance, make sure that you are muted and your camera is off, and you use *6 to mute and unmute. So just a quick run through. All of you have heard this, but like I say, stay muted with your camera off. If you wish to speak, enter your name in the chat. Your name will be called in the order received. Again, if you're a subcommittee member, please feel free to use the raised hand option. If a cell phone, *6, and I will call on you at the end of the meeting if you're from the public and want to make a public comment. At the end of the meeting, you'll state your name, spell your last name out loud, and you will have 2 minutes to speak. All right, a verbal recording of this meeting is important. Please speak slowly and clearly. I will keep that in mind myself. Chat is not to be used for anything other than public speaker requests or basic staff administration. Public comments, again, will be heard verbally at the end. Please disconnect and hang up all devices after the chair adjourns the meeting. And with that, I will hand this meeting over to Jennifer Ostlund for the director's report. Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the February Livable Places Action Committee meeting. I'm Jennifer Ostlund, Deputy Director of the Houston Planning and Development Department, filling in for Margaret Wallace Brown, the director who's usually here. I just want to take a minute to thank the commissioners for your continued support of this project. We appreciate the time you commit to these meetings, including preparation, homework, and participating in these discussions. Please feel free to contact us in between meetings if you have questions about any of the concepts or standards being presented. This can get complicated sometimes. So I hope you're prepared for some robust discussions today as we get further into the details of proposed standards for development. Just remember, the goal of this project is to encourage a wider variety of housing products that meet the needs of all ages, household sizes and incomes, and that contribute to walkable and livable neighborhoods. It's about encouraging people to do the right kind of development. Or making it easier for them to do the right kind of development that we all want to see. This concludes my director's report. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, call the Planning and Development Department at 832-393-6600 or visit our website at houstonplanning.com. And I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. All right, at this point in time, we will go ahead and move on with the agenda, and I'll move this over to Savita Bandy to go over the agenda for today's meeting. Thank you.
Mr.
Savita.
Chair, if I may, Neil Dykeman has his hand raised. I'm not sure why.
Great. Oh, thank you. Mr. Dykeman?
Nope.
Neil?
Inadvertent. Thank you.
You were here. Okay, good. We'll make another notation. Thank you, sir. All right, Savita.
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. In the agenda for today, we have discussion on conservation districts and recommendation for secondary dwelling units, followed by benefits and preliminary ideas for small lot developments. This will be followed by homework activities and expectations for next meeting. We'll have time for public comments at the end. Most of you may recall that last year, this committee created a conservation districts focus group to work on conservation district ordinance for Houston. The focus group developed an outline for the framework to create conservation districts and got consensus from the committee to proceed with preliminary ordinance drafting. To present conservation districts and to lead the discussion today, I would like to invite our City Historic Preservation Officer, Roman Mikhail. Roman, you're online.
Thank you. Yes, I'm right here. Good afternoon, Chairs Garza and Clark and the rest of the committee members. I'm Roman McAllen, and I am the city's Historic Preservation Officer. I'm honored to serve in that capacity. So a brief, with the agenda material, I want to remind you that you were sent a preliminary draft copy of an ordinance for your review. The purpose of today's presentation, brief presentation, is to provide a recap on the concept of conservation districts and note some highlights about the draft ordinance and receive your input on the preliminary draft. The legal department is still working on the ordinance, and it is just a draft. Your comments will be well received, and we look forward to hearing from you. If you'd like to forward the slide, Savita. Next slide, please. So first of all, what existing tools do people have in Houston to preserve the character or preserve structures in their neighborhoods? As a reminder, here they are in my mind: the minimum building line program and the minimum lot size program or ordinances, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And then there's the prohibited yard parking ordinance. And then there are historic districts and protected landmarks. Historic districts and protected landmarks are similar in that they maintain the status quo. If you landmark a property, a building, or a site, that we're going to look at that site using criteria in the city's ordinance to determine what changes can be made to that site. And it's the same with historic districts. I don't state their ordinary landmarks. The city of Houston does have landmarks, and I don't mention them because though they're there and they're a designation, if someone is denied even a demolition of a landmark in Houston, if they're denied that demolition, they just need to wait 90 days and they can complete the they can demolish that structure. So those two are really what matter. Then there's heritage districts, which were just created in the last year. And that's a tool really for the protection of public rights of way and sort of public infrastructure. And the first district there is in the Freedmanstown area. Then this new tool would be conservation districts, and I'm hoping that we can pass them. Next slide, please. Pass the ability to create them. So the purpose, and let me first also thank the task force, many of whom are on this call, for their time and consideration of the proposal and for listening to me. So the main thing is that the purpose of creating an ordinance allowing conservation districts to be created is to preserve, maintain, and protect the community character and heritages of neighborhoods having distinctive characteristics and patterns of development. A couple of subpoints. Historic districts, again, they maintain the status quo. Here, however, change is welcomed. It's just that we were looking for an appropriate level of protection, if you will, of those areas, and to encourage new development that is compatible in the proposed areas. Next slide. As drafted, an area needs to have at least one block face, has to have consistent physical attributes of scale and development, and then the area should be contiguous. It can't be hodgepodge. This is all very similar to a historic district in that regard. Next slide, please. This is perhaps has a key difference here. With a historic district, different criteria. Here, what we're asking for is that an area have one of these common streetscapes or significant community sites or land use patterns, creating an area identity, or a common pattern of development and landscaping and building setbacks, or a common scale or bulk among the buildings and structures. And finally, and I think most importantly, is that the proposed district is an area that was planned or developed by or for historically underrepresented or disenfranchised community. I'm not leaving anyone out here. We can add to that wording, but the general idea, there are parts of town that have parts of Houston, Texas, that have been underrepresented at the table, and we can elaborate later. Next slide. Now, a key feature of the proposed ordinance is that when an area comes forth with an application, that they perhaps can choose from a menu of elements of what to regulate. And here is an example of what they might choose from. And it's long. I might as well go through it just to be clear. Building height or number of stories, building size and massing, principal elevation features, that's features of the front of the structure, lot size and coverage, setbacks, off-street parking requirements, roof line and pitch, paving or hardscaping, building orientation, general site planning, if you will, urban architectural character, very key component. Some of these areas have a lot of older, small homes, and the homes face the street. They have porches, interact. So there's that. Building materials, actually scratch that one. That one, it can be in there, but typically you're not going to regulate the actual materials, although legally I think you can do so possibly in Houston. Garage entrance location, fence walls, entrance lighting, driveways and curbs, and building relocation. Next slide. Missing from that list is demolition, which is, I believe, still in the running. Review of development applications. So if this ordinance passes, and then if the city council will approve a historic district, and right now their Independence Heights area has people working to complete the early process to get 10% of an area to apply for a conservation district. Then if one's created, review of the applications, well, you would have, just like you have with historic districts in our city system, if you're pulling a permit in an area for a structure in a district, permitting calls this office up here and asks to release any holds or release a hold. And so conservation district boundaries are entered into the city's permitting system, and then that's flagged for review. Staff reviews the application for compliance, not historic commission. The historic commission will review the application for the district, but once a district's created, the idea is that city staff could review this and approve them. Though there's this other point in the ordinance. For example, if you had the demolition of perhaps a significant structure in that conservation district, or some other reason, again, actually, this should be codified in the district application that something might go to the historic commission. Next slide, if there's one there. I can't remember if we've covered it. All right, what are we talking about here? What are we talking about? So here's a picture. I just actually took this off of Google Street View. This is Omega Street. Some of y'all may have approved this project or seen it. I'm not, this is a project. To your left in this, the image right in front of you is a new construction of a home. And to its left are 2 or 3 more like this. One thing, I'm not, this structure, I want to point out something nice about this structure that a neighborhood might ask for. If you could just hit the button there, Suvita. A key element of the design of this, oops, may not have worked for. We'll just go back. I'll just have to point it out. It's okay. Somehow the animation's not working here, but the structure on your right is obviously an original home in that neighborhood, 1 story. And if you look at its finished floor height, it's very similar to the finished floor height of the first floor of the building next to it. And that's a good thing. And it's not common. Often the construction of new structures in the neighborhoods will be out of scale. The first floor will be 3, 4, 5 or feet higher than the first floor ceiling height of the structure adjacent to it. And it's that scale and the proportion that a district might ask to require. So not that there's any requirement here, but I think this one thing about this particular new construction in that it does it does work well with that structure, and there's no district here and there's no regulation, but pointing out that that would be a kind of thing that someone might ask for, that that would regulate the new construction in the area. And that's the only example I have of that in these images. And I think from here, Suvita or Chair, I don't know if there's another slide. I don't know, and I don't know if there's the appropriate time to take questions, but I believe that's all we have. Correct me if I'm wrong, Suvita. I don't know if the next slide didn't go along with you. Let me see what we got here. Yes. So questions are next.
If I may, Roman, thank you so much for that presentation. I would like to invite our legal counsel, Kim Mickelson, please, to make a comment before we open up for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suvita, and thank you, Roman, for introducing that. Just for the committee's benefit, we have been working really hard with staff on this draft ordinance based on some of your input. And as you read through it, again, we welcome feedback and comments. We are still working on some issues among staff. So we may make some further modifications to it. And of course, once you all and then Historic Commission see it, you know, it's an iterative process. So stay tuned and we'll keep you informed on how all of that develops.
All right, thank you. Suvita?
Yes, sir. We are ready for questions
Yeah.
related to conservation districts.
Wonderful. I think I saw Sherry Smith's hand raised.
Yes, you did.
Go right ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the overview. I just had and this may be a point of clarification. On the list of elements, is there a maximum of, and when you're applying for the district, can you indicate more than one basis for the creation of this conservation district?
Roman, are you going to handle that?
Yes, so not this slide. You're talking about the criteria for creating a district. I think it's a slide back. Is that what you mean?
Well, on this menu of elements, and this is the one that I looked at, is this if someone is applying for within the conservation district, or the elements that have to be met to create the conservation district?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that, Ms. Smith. For example, let's just take the example of Independence Heights. When they apply for a conservation district for that area, they can choose to ask to have these things regulated, if you will, or they may set standards based on those elements. So no, those aren't required. That's not it. They may not choose any of those. They may want a conservation district where it's a free-for-all and they just want the recognition of the significance of that place. But most likely, people are going to want to ask for a few things to regulate a few things that affect that area, if you will. So okay, no, they're not a requirement. Those are just a potential list. And I failed to mention something. If an area is only asking for a minimum lot size or a minimum building line, then those programs, and that's all, well, we would discourage them to apply for a conservation district and ask them to just utilize that standing program and not muddy the waters. But you would come forth if you have other things you would like to see protected or regulated. I hate to use the word regulated. It's such a lightning rod, but that's what it is.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, Roman, I do have a quick question. You mentioned a minimum lot size and setback. So if someone is asking for a conservation district with more of these items, as you said, besides minimum lot size and setbacks, could then minimum lot size and setback be included in the criterion for the conservation district? Could that be streamlined into the whole package versus doing them individually?
I see legal has turned on her camera. I'm going to defer to Ms. Mickelson, please.
Cam, are you there?
Yes, and we've talked about that. And I think the idea, especially from the director, is that, yes, this would be a way to combine it all so you don't have to do separate procedures and separate petitions.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm sure that elicited some questions. Are there any before we move forward?
Lisa Clark has her hand raised, and then Zion Escobar.
Lisa, go right ahead.
Thank you, Sunny. Roman, I just have a question on how do these conservation districts compare to, let's say, a minimum building setback or application or minimum lot size, as far as I see you did do at least one block face, so that's defined. I was concerned about that. But how does it compare with percentages of the area approving the application? And maybe this is a question for Kim, but is it kind of apples to apples? Do they need to get the same percentage of residents in the block face or two that they're trying to do. Is it similar to applications for minimum lot size and minimum building setback? If you
Okay.
can follow my
I-
question.
I can answer part of it, I did put that in there. A neighborhood will need 51% of the tracts in the proposed district, and the support of the owners of 51% of the tracts in the proposed district for that district to move forward. I don't have the number on the top of my head for what's needed on minimum building line, but I'm sure someone on here does, or legal. You have
I'm
that.
sure Kim has an answer to that.
I can't spout numbers right off the top of my head here, but that is one of the aspects we're looking at in how to integrate it to make sure that it's not a shortcut to that, or that they do
Right.
follow that same percentage if they have those criteria in. We haven't worked all of that logistically out yet.
Yeah,
Or
and
I
that's
have
just one,
at least
yeah,
on my
I
mind.
agree. I don't want it to be a shortcut or a streamline or, it needs to be the same so that, well, because then it's unfair also for other people that want to do minimum lot size, minimum setback and all of that. It needs to be the same percentages across the board, or it's not fair
Yes.
for one type or the other. And then I had another question, but I'm sorry, it escaped me.
So, Lisa, was it appeals body? That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, that was one of them, is what happens and when, and all you guys on planning commission know I'm going to ask this question. I can't believe I forgot, but my head is not completely straight yet. But when an application lands in the planning department and the director has it, how does the public know that their property is kind of on hold until this is created or not created? Is it similar to what we see with other applications for the other ordinances?
So notice, is there notice?
Yeah. So far, I think we've tracked the similar timeline for historic commissions, and that's another element of the comparison that I want to complete for minimum lot size, prohibited yard parking, minimum building line.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then of
it's-
course, yeah, exactly what Sunny said is, what if you have, I'll use the most recent one, 8 lots, 4 on each side. One side wants it, they have 3 or 4 that want it. The other side, most of it is owned by one owner and only one person that owns a lot wants it on that side. How do they appeal that if they own 75% of one of the block faces? How would they go about appealing that decision? Same way as they come in front of planning commission for, the others.
Yeah. So real quickly, I mean, these will go to historic commission, to the Houston Historical and Architectural Commission, and then they go on to council for adoption of an ordinance. And in this draft, you'll see specifically that either the Historical Commission or City Council can modify the boundaries or the guidelines that are developed in the particular ordinance for that particular conservation district.
Okay, great. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
If I may, Chair Garza, one more time. Roman.
Yes, Roman, go right ahead.
If I may, one for co-chair Lisa Clark, and I know just legal that a key factor that came out in that big Supreme Court case that happened here involving Houston and preservation was that Houston's preservation ordinances must comply with Chapter 211, and so they're just on the notification part of it. There's a rigorous requirement there that we'll meet, as we will also meet now for all historic landmarks that we do in the city and other districts.
Thank you, Roman.
All right, thank you, everyone. All right, Tammy.
Next
see
is,
Zion.
yes, Zion
Right
and
ahead.
then Curtis Davis.
And then I see Neil Dykeman next. So Zion, go right ahead.
Thank you. My question is just asking about clarification on the eligibility criteria I see in the draft document. It's criteria B, existing historic districts may not be converted to conservation districts. Could someone provide clarification on exactly what that means, given that, for instance, Freedmanstown has a federal historic district, right? We're seeking local historic districts. Would that preclude us from seeking a conservation district?
Thank you, Zion. A very good question. Actually, we need to catch that in the ordinance. So that should read, local historic districts cannot convert. And frankly, it's not one I like. I think that there could be a time and place for converting a historic district to a conservation district, but I don't think I'll have the support of the Historic Commission and other people in that regard. But I'm being honest that I do think that, in my opinion, it'd be nice. But regardless, no, of course, Freedmanstown we need to clarify that language that we don't mean a national register well, there are no state districts, but yeah.
And if Mr. Chair, if I can add, this is Kim
Please.
Mickelson from Legal again. I think the idea about having that language in is we don't want historic districts to think, oh, we can become less. It doesn't mean, I think we do foresee a point where you can be a historic district and be a conservation district, because the conservation district deals with some other elements that historic district doesn't. And later in the draft, there is language that a conservation district can include all or part of an historic district, but we don't want to lose the historic designation by them converting, if that makes sense, or at least as it's drafted.
Wonderful. So this is an and, not an or.
Correct.
Wonderful. Thank you for that
We
clarification.
just don't want the historic district designation to go away at this point.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've got Peter Friedman up next. Peter.
Thank you. I just following up a little bit on how the voting works. Can someone explain that a little bit to me? How that 51% is calculated on a block?
It's the same way it's calculated for a historic district with a different buy-in needed. And it's measured by track. So as you know, I know you know better than me, but if you own adjacent lots, I mean side by side lots, that's going to be one track. But we're looking for, in any proposed district, taking the number of tracks, and we need 51% of the tract owners to be for the application to move forward.
Okay, so you're saying a tract like a parcel, not the lot count on the parcel, but the actual larger piece of land?
Yes, sir. An example would be that the Bruner Harmonium Historic District that was just recently approved by City Council. Bruner Harmonium Historic District, one owner owned a block face, which by CAD was 1, 2, 4 or 5, 4 or 5 lots. If you were looking at it, you'd think they were all lots, but they are owned by one owner. So in that proposed historic district, that block face was one tract. And then across the street, that same owner owned 2 lots. That's one tract. And then there were 2 other one or two other individually owned lots. So those are each. So in that district, for example, you end up at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think you end up with just 5 tracts. But if you were looking at it by lot, you'd see more like 8 or 9 even. I can't remember. But so you reduce, if the person owns more, it kind of reduces the number of tracts you're dealing with. That help? It doesn't. I guess what it does is it actually.
That you may have to, but they are asking for it.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. And
Everyone mute. Everyone mute. I'm sorry, there's some interference in here, so make sure you're muted as we're hearing other conversations. So Roman, there was that question.
Yes, Mr. Friedman, And so I think what it does is if I'm not mistaken, that lowers the potential for an undue influence, or like that's not a fair way to say it, but one owner having a greater impact, if you will, because they own side by side. We're just going to consider that one tract. That help?
It does. It does. I have a little bit of a concern just because our CDC builds affordable homes, and we do own a large size of parcels in certain areas. And I just have this fear of this being used to maybe push out affordable housing or something that kind of not in my backyard type of situation. And is there anything in this to kind of help prevent people utilizing this for not for the purpose it's made for?
That's a good question. You know, unintended consequences. That's why we're having these meetings. But Roman, let me ask you a question, really more for clarification. At Planning Commission, when we have seen those minimum lot size and setbacks come through, I always see two metrics. One is you have, 55% of the people in the block voted for versus how many didn't vote and how many voted against. But then you also have the metric, which is 52% of the landowners wanted this, were positive, which comprised X amount of property within the block. So don't we use both those metrics so that we know not only how many people voted, but what percentage of properties that is? So in other words, if I own all the north face and 4 people own the south face, my one vote is still has some weight, because that means that I own 50% of the property and I voted no, where the 4 on the south voted yes. So it's not as though I got beat 4-1. That, I think that metric about how much land we're talking about comes into play. I don't know if that answers Mr. Friedman's question, but that does give us balance when we're looking at the whole project.
Okay, that's a good point, Chair, and I'm not familiar with that adoption process. If anyone else on staff could point, is that in the law, in the ordinance, that those two is that those two sort of measurements, if you will, are part of the approval process? Or I'm not sure.
Tim, are you there? Am I mistaken? I don't know I know that we always get that information at Planning Commission, which helps us make a decision. I don't know if it's, quote, hard and fast written into the ordinance or not.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm not recalling offhand that it's written into the ordinance, but we'll make sure to look at that as to how it's balanced.
Okay.
And as to Mr. Friedman's question, I agree with you. That was an excellent question, and making sure it's used as a shield and not a sword. But we'll look at some way to work that in.
All right, thank you. I show next Neil
Curtis
Dykeman.
Davis. Nope, Curtis Davis.
Oh, I'm sorry. Curtis Davis then. Neil, I'll call you next, and then Lisa.
Thank you. My question is in the same vein around the decision-making process in the neighborhood. And this is just to get a clarity on the rationale behind the process, not to debate what it should be. And this is probably best answered by Ms. Mickelson. In terms of the right to vote on this, it appears that this is conceptually treated as a property interest concern rather than a civic interest concern, which is focused on land ownership as to the decision-making or influencing the recommendation versus residency, that is tenancy. There are also landowners who are non-tenants or who are non-resident, I'm sorry. Can you speak to the rationale as to why this, and there are others, types of district development frameworks that require property owner votes and have no framework for resident votes around the issue of civic concerns rather than property interest concerns?
Kim, you're muted.
Yes, I just figured that out. An excellent question, Mr. Dykeman, and I would say that that is typically set up, I suspect, because of notice requirements that are in various land development statutes that have been established by the state legislature over many decades. For example, subdivision and zoning, historic preservation authority, those all require notification to the property owners as shown on the last tax roll. So that has generally rolled into most cities' regulations. We could certainly open up the discussion of what it means for residents as well, and how we might balance that.
Yeah, the reason I asked, because the notification, I've heard the notification point being raised, but if you're a registered voter, you know, you can be notified, your address is there. So I that's kind of where I'm curious about the rationale. Is there a legal framework that requires it? And if not, then is it open to look at residency as being part of the eligibility in terms of making that vote? In many neighborhoods that are predominantly rental neighborhoods, let's say, and in certain cases, there are more renters coming online as a percentage of population than there are homeowners. And as property is owned absentee, not just by individuals, but by corporate interests, again, many areas and districts are beginning to get a large proportion of non-resident ownership. And that residency is underrepresented, if not represented at all. And that's my concern about this. And as we go forward, and so there's a legal framework. Are there legal restrictions, both in state law and ordinances? And then there's just the conceptual framework. How do we think about the quality of the civic environment, and how do we poll the residents to their opinions about that?
Yeah, and I'll expand just real quickly a little bit more on that. You know, if you think about it, I think there is a legal framework for consulting and getting the owners buy-in, no matter where they are. Imagine if you were an owner and tenants tried to impose some limitations on what could be done with the property without permission, as opposed to the government instituting it top down. This is similar to other things we have in the city that are generated from the ground up. It's very grassroots for the neighborhood to bring this together. Residents very often, but then we have to notify the owners. But we could certainly look at how maybe to do a 2-layer or additional notification and input to residents as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tammy, who's next?
Neil Dykeman and then Mike Dishberger.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
the broad question I'd like to ask is if Roman or Kim, if one of you could kind of do a compare contrast to what exactly is the difference, the key differences between the historic district ordinance, how to set that one up, and this, both in the setup as well as the governance. I think I'm following, but I'm not sure I've got the point for point. And then I guess my broader comment to the last couple of questions, I would find it very concerning if tax ID were the decision factor at a block level district. It would be many of these, especially these older districts. Some of these houses have been on the same block. They're multiple lots, but they've been on the same block for 100 years. And it would be, frankly, whether this comment from the CDC perspective, I would have the comment from the owner perspective. I've got several houses that in areas that could very easily be outvoted just because of lot versus versus tax ID, and that would be quite concerning at a 51% and the block size as the minimum, kind of the mini district concept. I mean, 4 houses could outvote the guy at the end of the block and lock him out of doing something with their land. I think that just seems like a recipe for a fight. So doing it on a lot basis seems a lot more reasonable.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll take on the question part of that, Chair.
I'm sorry, who's speaking? Roman?
I'm sorry, this is Roman. My
yes,
apologies.
go ahead.
This is Roman McAllen in the city. And Neil, thank you for that question. I happen to have a little point by point here. Let me give them to you, the difference between historic districts and this. First of all, in order to create the historic district requires an area have a majority of historic structures. That's not a requirement in conservation districts. You know, that it's a majority of the buildings must be able to be deemed historic. That's one. You need 67%, as I said earlier, of all property owners versus 51%. Historic districts regulate in significantly more detail than we're anticipating here. As you know, in historic districts, we're looking at window trim, porch details, gable vents, exposed roof rafter tails, original siding, and that's not something that we feel is going to be in the final product when the district comes forward. Historic districts, most of the time, for significant work, need approval from the historic commission. We're always going to want to go to staff. In this case, there's not that requirement. The 11 criteria for approval of a certificate of appropriateness don't carry over to the conservation. And that's about it, I think, unless legal or anyone wants to add something.
And can I just, if I'm follow up there and make sure I understand?
Yes, go ahead.
So does the historic commission has governance over it in, I think somebody mentioned appeals, et cetera, or they're just involved in the setup? How is that? How does that work here?
Just the setup, just the approval of creating the district.
Thank you.
Actually, in appeals we didn't address earlier, and I think that's something in the ordinance we need to look at, and if that's going to follow. The city has a historic preservation appeals board. Maybe that board gets maybe it's going to go to that. But right now, the commission is Archaeological Commission, just involved at the first look at an application and whether or not they recommend approval to City Council.
Okay, thank you. Tammy, I show Lisa as well as Mike Dishberger.
Correct.
So who's next?
Mike Dishberger, then Lisa.
All right,
Okay.
and then Nick Ziegler.
Hi, it's Mike Dishberger.
Go ahead, sir.
I want to add on to Neil as I'm listening to this. First of all, I'd hope we get an opportunity to see the final draft of all the different rules and stuff. Just like we have just some bullet points right now to see the final draft because it's all devil's in the details. I would agree with Neil that I own property in some areas where I put a bunch of properties together under one tax ID just because it's easier to pay your taxes at the end of the year, and HCAT allows you to do that. And I could see a point where a person owns 75% of the land on a block and gets outvoted 3-1 because you're saying it's per owner. I guess I would like to see it front footage and similar things like that, like we've done on the other things. And again, I just want to make sure this is not an easier go around and to form historic districts, and all of a sudden the entire city of Houston just got these things going off because it's easy to do. 51% is not a heavy bar, and we're making it an easier bar by saying it's one owner per property. And sometimes you have 2 or 3 homes. Some of these ADUs we've been talking about at this meeting on those properties that you have 3 renters. I've got one in the Heights now. It's on 3 lots and there's 5 units on it. Just purchased it, and it's a rental. So I just ask us to be careful about this, that we're not harming some property rights of people. I'm for the conservation districts. I think it's a great idea. I don't want to become a tool to just take over Houston, and because it's so much easier to pass it. So those are my comments. I definitely think this group needs to see the final draft and able to comment on it before it goes to council.
Thank you, Mike. All right, Lisa is next. Lisa Clark.
Well, I knew if I followed Mike, he'd probably make the comments or questions that I have. We think so much alike. And my concern, and Sonny knows me well, my concern is, let's go back to the 8 lots, 4 on each side of 2 block faces. I happen to own 4 on the north side. You got 4 owners on the south side. They outvote me because I get 1 vote. That is not fair. That is a property taking. It needs to be lot by lot by lot, and they should not be combined as a tract. I think that's a dangerous thing for us to put into the ordinance. And I do agree with Mike. I think as the ordinance, the final draft comes about, we should be able to look at that and just make sure that we agree with all the details, because this is important. And I agree. I think conservation districts are a great idea. I just want to make sure that what we all agree to or think we're agreeing to is what, the ordinance reads. Thanks,
All right.
Sunny. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, we'll next go to Megan Ziegler. Megan.
Well, following both Lisa and Mike, the majority of my comments and questions were already put out there. And one other one I had is the 51%, is that like the prevailing building lines and lot sizes where that goes to the commission and then to council, or is 51% an automatic council?
I think I can answer that, but please correct me if I'm wrong. If you get 51% and no one sends in, what's the word? They're sort of like, we don't want it.
Protest.
Yeah, thank you. If there's a protest, then planning commission sees it. If there's not, and it just sails right through, to the best of my understanding, right through city council. But if there's a protest, that's when you and planning commission see it.
At 51%.
Anything over, yeah. And,
okay.
And if you recall, planning commission, we've seen them under 51%.
Right.
But basically, there has to be a protest for us to even get a look at it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Makes sense. Okay, Scott Kubler, I show you're up next.
Chair, this is Roman.
Roman, go ahead, please.
Roman, and I thought I saw Kim kind of thinking about saying something there. But to be clear, for me, the 51%, that just allows that application to move forward to historic commission. In this case, as the requirement, you're going to go to historic commission. You're not going to get the 51 and go straight up under the current draft in the way that I've ever thought about it.
No, I think Megan was talking about building line and setback, 51%.
Okay, yes, she was. Okay, I didn't know if there was thinking. Okay, thanks.
I believe so. Megan, you were talking about minimum lot size.
I was actually using it as, I wondered if it was being treated the same way. So 51% would get it to historic commission, but if it came in at 67, it goes right to council.
No, Roman. No, I was talking minimum lot size. Roman and Kim, go ahead and address historical.
Yeah, so it doesn't vary on the percentage there, Commissioner Ziegler. It's based on, if it gets to 51% as a conservation district, that may have a component that includes minimum lot size plus 6 other items. 51%, 52% maybe agree with it. It goes to historical commission and then it goes to city council, regardless of whether there's a protest or not. Even if there are no protests, it will go to commission and then on to city council, because it includes other elements besides that minimum lot size or building line. So I think more of them will get seen. I was wondering if maybe your question was, should they also come to planning commission as the minimum building?
Well, no, I think historic is fine. It was more, I do think when they come at 51%, it feels like there's such great dialogue for the public on either side that I just hope they had the same chance.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, either be it planning commission or historic. It seems like we've had just a lot of good information has come out of those meetings when they're public, and we get to hear from the applicants and from the people that are objecting.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Scott, go right ahead, sir. Scott, you may be muted. Scott Kubler. Scott.
Bueller.
I hear you. You're there,
you hear
sir.
me?
Go ahead. We've got
you. I'm here as the representative of the Super Neighborhood Alliance, and listening to the developers, I sympathize with what their challenges are, but at the same time, all of us have lived in environments where we would like the opportunity to have something be reviewed before it gets sent through. And what I'm hearing is that we have concerns because we don't want to have something reviewed in the process. And if that's not the case, well, then great. But I think there's a problem for saying that if we have 51% of the people going, wait a minute, I want this taken a look at. I don't see anything wrong with it. Now, to be sympathetic to the developers, I'm a contractor myself and have had to deal with permitting and the delays that can occur and the costs associated with that. So if we added, hey, 51%, this is going to go to additional review, but you only have 2 weeks to be able to do the review. So we know there's a sense of urgency that I think we can have a compromise on how to be able to move forward and satisfy both sides. Just a thought.
Chair, this is Co-Chair Clark. Could I answer on behalf of developers? You're muted. I'm going to take that as a yes. Scott, I think there's been some misunderstanding. We want these applications to be reviewed. And if there's 51% or there's 67% and there's a protest or two, we want that to be reviewed. We don't want things to just be pushed through. That wasn't our comments.
Okay.
We like review. We like things to be reviewed in a timely manner.
So is it the timely issue that you're concerned with?
No, I'm not concerned. I want it to be reviewed timely, but none of us on this meeting have said we don't want reviews. We do want reviews. We're not arguing to say we don't want reviews. Not the argument, but the comment you keep hearing is we want everyone that owns property to have a fair say in what happens to their land that they own. But it's not a review issue. We like reviews. We want things to be reviewed. We just, of course, want them in a timely manner, just like you do. But we're not arguing to not have reviews. We're not asking for things to be streamlined and just sent through. That's not our request.
Okay, so you're fine with the 51% as long as we have an adequate understanding what 51% means.
Yeah. We're fine with the 51%, but if you have a protest, that needs to be reviewed. People need to be able to have a forum where they can go talk. And that would be the historical commission is what I'm understanding most likely. And so we want them to have that opportunity to go in and speak, just like minimum lot size or building setback, they come to planning commission.
Right.
And if they've protested, they do have an opportunity to speak on behalf of their property. So that was what we were talking about, is to make sure that these reviews are similar. And just because they have 51%, they can't just sail through and go to council. They do need to be reviewed. So that was I think our concerns are similar to yours, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Thank you.
You're still muted. Neil Dykeman's next.
Sorry. Let me ask Kim and Roman to step in here and make sure that we're clear before we move forward for Scott. Kim or Roman, does one of you want to address this question?
I don't know that I have anything else to add. I think the idea is all along, we know from a legal perspective, we have to be sensitive to property owners' property rights and notification. We understand that, yes, everything, and I want everybody to be clear on this, that yes, the application itself is 51%. All of those will be reviewed. So with objections or no objections, all of those go to historic commission and then to city council. So there's a robust notification and opportunity, public hearing and public comment on all of that. So, and I know I heard the other question regarding drafts and revisions to this, and you should have all received the draft. If you have not, get in touch with Suvita and we'll get that out to you. And yes, it's certainly our intention to add, especially when there's substantive and substantial changes, if any, we'll certainly bring that back and the drafts will be publicly available.
All right. Thank you, Kim. I show Neil Dykeman. Neil?
Yes, a follow-up question, just for clarification, make sure I'm following correctly. So can you either Roman or Kim kind of walk through how non-contributing properties or a non-conforming property or a demolition is handled both up front as well as after the district's set up, and then is there and I'm trying to think through the HHC process or the analog. If these are essentially administratively handled, is there any notice period in the on approvals going forward, or is that all handled by staff, or what's the mechanism here that you guys have envisioned?
I'll let Roman start off with the process and procedure and jump in, because he's been testing this out, I think, with how it will work. So and I'll jump in if needed.
Okay.
Roman.
And I was trying, Neil, if you could break those down, there was a kind of a flurry of questions in there, and I was trying to process.
The simple part of just trying to understand the process of the mechanism. So in historic, we have you can have a non-contributing structure inside a district, right? I was just trying to wrap my head around, is this envision a district can't go forward if all the buildings aren't there and exactly the same, if the buildings are blank lots, if there's one lot and then buildings and some buildings, how exactly, so what's the sure. Vision for the non-contributing portion, if any, and then after the district's up and running, if there are changes to a building proposed that essentially would either a non-contributing one gets torn down, contributing one gets torn down, or like the same process we'd see in HHC for a historic district, what analog should I think of for a conservation district?
Well, in a nutshell, that they're very different. We aren't talking about contributing and non-contributing buildings at this point. So an application might come forward for a neighborhood, and they're going to ask for those regulations, and it's not going to. We haven't talked about contributing and not contributing in districts. So it's just very different until what we're trying to do with this particular ordinance is to just allow people this tool to create a conservation district. And then when that application comes forward, in fact, as part of the application, if you look in the draft ordinance, they have to say what they'd like to regulate. So it could happen, I suppose, that a district and enough people have the buy-in that they say, in this particular area, we are concerned about this particular house or these two houses, and the owners, I would hope in that case will be in support of the district, but where there may be that application, I suppose, could come forward with an inventory and a list of structures, but right now we're not looking at it in that regard. So it isn't comparable. You can't really see how that would go forward. I don't know if you could give an example of what's come in your mind as a concern, but maybe you're talking about the case, for example, if someone's asking in a historic district today, if you're going to request a C of A for demolition of a contributing structure, our ordinance has, which I think is a pretty bold move. It says you have to put a 4x8 sign, 4 foot by 8 foot sign in front of that contributing historic home. And you have to put that you've applied for a demolition request, and here's the number. And that's kind of notifying a lot of people, obviously, that structure, that someone's asking to take it down. Again, hard to compare this conservation district tool because it isn't about keeping the status quo, and we're not going to craft an inventory. Our ordinance in Houston is similar to ordinances across the state of Texas, in that when you make a historic district, you have an inventory, you label the houses. This one's contributing. To those who aren't familiar, a historic district will have a, quote, period of significance. And the Heights, Houston, the 3 districts, it generally is something like around the turn of the century, around 1900 to say 1936. And homes that were built after that are considered non-contributing. So if there were homes built in the 70s and 80s and 60s and 70s and 80s, those on a survey would be non-contributing, which means you could demolish those houses without interference from the Historic Preservation Office. But anyway, all of that is very different, Neil, and I'm happy to answer any more questions
And so that's what I was trying to wrap. I may be using the wrong analog, yeah. But for example, if somebody puts up a district that has 8 houses on a block and one of them is very different than the others, yeah, is that house carved out? Is it grandfathered? Is it, yeah, does it, yeah, how is it handled in the setup process? And then if you want to make a change to it going forward, how is that handled when it's obviously no longer conforming? Or can you not do a conservation district if they're not all within the bounds of whatever the group has proposed? And as I said, if I'm using the wrong analog, I apologize.
No, that's okay. And it is a different animal a little bit. It is. The city of San Antonio has a lot of conservation districts, and they're not regulated by the historic office, but they're still a preservation tool. So it is a difference, quite a bit different.
Mr. Chair, if I could jump in, this is Kim Mickelson on a couple of these. The issue, we're not at this point contemplating, as Roman has explained, the contributing, non-contributing. The idea is that our adopting ordinance for the creation of this district, which will regulate a limited number of items from that laundry list of, the menu choices that each district creates. Staff is instructed during the public comment period and public participation period to come up with a set of design, I'm going to call them design guidelines for lack of a better word, but things to guide staff. The idea is that those will be incorporated into the ordinance and will hopefully be done with such clarity that then what we've provided for in the draft ordinance is that these would be administrative approvals by staff, that they would not go through commission review. And if you look, when you get a chance, I know you all haven't probably had a chance to read through this, but that portion and what it means to be placed in a conservation district, that administrative part is on the bottom of page 5 into 6 and how that will be handled. And so I think the idea is to make it less onerous so that you're not going for a certificate of appropriateness like you would in a historic district, but it's a more administrative approval process.
So I can see this as a much more streamlined tool, and having used administrative approvals, yeah, I understand the value of that. Yeah, the one thing that I would like y'all to consider is, yeah, some level of clarification on the process of things that don't fit. Like, how is staff supposed to handle, yeah, upfront and changes or grandfathering to a structure that is clearly within that block face, yeah, and maybe even wants to be included, whether it does or not. But what are they actually being asked to sign up to? I think in the historic district, we have some decades of precedent as well as the ordinance to define how that structure is handled and what to expect. And I'd just like to make sure that there's some clarity on that before someone brings up a district and tries to hash it out.
Okay. Good point.
Right. Okay, Megan Ziegler, I have you up next.
Okay, I think I'm kind of piggybacking on this because I'm just trying to understand if there's, let's say, either a house that needs to be torn down or even a vacant lot in a district. And so you decide that you want to build whatever it is you want to build, you're going to have to meet the criteria that we're saying the 51% have put on that lot. Is that correct? And then that will be known, that will be in the ordinance. And that will be handled at staff review. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is a review before it is, like, if there's a replat, if there's not, depends whether it's just a staff review or if it comes in front of planning commission.
So based on the adopting ordinance and those design criteria, we anticipate in our first test runs that a lot of this is going to deal a lot with bulk and scale of buildings not architectural style per se, though some may have some urban architectural character elements, but or the lot setback or what have you, that those are the kind of elements. These areas, once created, will be flagged in the permitting system, just like they are for minimum lot size or historic districts. And that all that will do at the permitting stage, when you come in with plans, say for a vacant lot, is it will flag it and say, oh, this needs to be reviewed by historic preservation, and that will get sent over and then worked through that administrative review. So you're correct on that.
Okay, again, I think this has been said, but just do have great concern about the lot versus track, and make sure that there has to be something that's a little more a better way to look at it. Probably I'd just say a little more fair for, you know, the property owner that does have multiple lots.
Chair, this is Roman.
Roman, go ahead.
To Ms. Ziegler's point, I just want to comment that I think we pulled over that track language from what is existing under the historic district, and I'm excited to look back at that and make sure that it feels equitable. That language was actually just pulled over. I don't know how it ended up in the district side, but it's there.
Let's take a look at that, because if we're talking about consensus here, it sounds like most everyone is concerned that everyone gets a fair shake and gets a hearing. So those are the two items that seem like are the most contentious at this point in time. All right, anyone else with questions for Mr. McAllen? All right, then. It looks like we're done with this section.
I have a question.
I'm going to go back to Savita.
I have a question.
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
This is Danny. Can you hear me?
Danny, I don't believe you're a subcommittee member, are you?
No, I just heard something from the last individual, and I mean, I could just be 1 minute, not even that.
Danny, I'm sorry. If I let you, I have to let everybody. If you want to put a question in the chat, I think maybe we could address that at the end of the meeting. Happy to, or you could speak at the end of the meeting during public comment.
Yeah, I actually called in, so I don't have a way of chatting. I'm doing it from my cell phone. So I don't have a way.
May I provide?
I didn't know you guys were here.
Savita, what do you recommend here?
We can provide our phone number, and he can call us and we can answer the question. Or if the individual
I can't call you. I can't call you if I'm already on the cell phone. I don't think I can.
Sir, Mr. Chair Garza, point of order. Let me just say that if I can almost see this fellow's phone number here, and I got my cell right next to me, I'm happy to text him and text him my name and my number and my office number.
Okay. Danny, if you don't mind, as I said, I can't open this up for public comment until the end of the meeting. But we can have Roman McAllen give you a call back, take your information, and get your question and perhaps answer it for you directly. Will that work?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Great. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
And point of order, I'm only seeing if someone is able to, on my staff, City of Houston, to see his last 4 digits. I see his first 6 digits. I just want to make sure I get in touch with him.
All right. Danny, what are the last 4 digits of your telephone number?
8490.
8490. Roman, do you have the whole thing?
Yes, thank you.
All right, sir. Danny, thank you so much for sitting in on this meeting. We appreciate it. And Roman McAllen will be getting back with you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, sir. All right. Anyone else, subcommittee members? Are there any other questions of Roman or Kim Mickelson? All right, well, hearing none, we will go back to Savita Bandy. Savita.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Roman, and thank you, Ms. Nicholson, for good information on the conservation districts. Appreciate your time. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is to discuss proposed recommendations for secondary dwelling units with respect to size and parking requirements. Next slide, please. The purpose of this committee is to create opportunities within our development standards that encourage housing variety and affordability. I want to emphasize that our scope of influence is focused on development standards only. Next slide, please. As per the current regulations in Chapter 42, single-family residential lot is defined as a lot with one building containing no more than 2 separate units with facilities for living, sleeping, cooking, eating. A lot can also have a freestanding building containing 1 dwelling unit and a detached secondary unit, no more than 900 square feet. Or a building containing 1 dwelling unit on 1 lot that is connected by a party wall with another unit on an adjacent lot. So in this image, you can see the 3 types of housing types that qualify under the single family residential definition within the ordinance today. So any of these type of structures could be built on a single family residential lot. Next slide, please. In this image, you can see that the 3 different housing types that qualify, this is how they look from an aerial image. And when compared with other cities that are just now changing their zoning regulations to allow more units on single family lots, Houston is ahead in the game with regulations that allow 2 units on single family residential lots. However, there is a small caveat with size limit on the detached secondary unit. Next slide, please. Sorry, you can stay on this one. Per the current regulations, maximum of 2 dwelling units allowed on single family restricted lots 3,500 square feet or larger when not prohibited by deed restrictions, and 2 parking spaces are required for single unit. Additional parking spaces will be required for the secondary unit. As you can see here, the ordinance does not restrict the size of the attached units. However, the detached units have a maximum size limit of 900 square feet. When it comes to parking requirements, attached units must provide 2 additional parking spaces regardless of the size. But detached unit is only required to provide 1 additional space due to its small unit size. So I'm trying to show the difference between the attached and the detached unit requirements, the secondary unit requirements in the slide. Next slide, please. One way to increase home options is by allowing homeowners to add a secondary dwelling unit, also called garage apartments, granny flats, or accessory dwelling units on the property. This naturally occurring affordable housing option can use the existing infrastructure and land to provide the additional homes in the market without significantly impacting the neighborhood fabric. These units can also increase the socio-economic diversity of the neighborhood by providing lower cost rental housing unit that is more affordable, resilient, built to today's standards, and can build net worth for the property owners. It can also be an additional unit for young adults or for older gentlemen who want to age in place. Next slide, please. Looking at the housing unit data from 2015 to 2019, it is evident that detached single-family homes are most common form of housing compared to other housing types. In comparison, the number of lots with 2 attached or detached units is very small. This means that there is a lot of potential to increase the number of homes if each single-family lot with 1 unit is able to add a secondary unit. This also means that small changes to the regulations can make a significant difference and add more homes to address the future need. Next slide, please. This information here from Link Houston shows that moderate income households in Houston continue to spend a high portion, more than 45% of their income, on transportation and housing, reflected by the increased costs of vehicle ownership, about close to $16,000 annually per household. These transportation costs compound the affordability challenge. In order to address affordability for Houstonians, it is needed for us to consider housing and transportation costs together. Next slide, please. Per the information from ACS, about 50% of the households have one car or no car. The chart shows that within the occupied units by tenure, there are more renter-occupied households with only one car. It means the need for parking spaces is low for households that are renting property. Car-free households are generally much more common in densely populated urban areas and moderate income neighborhoods where residents can't afford vehicle ownership. Research also suggests that younger families and one-person households are more likely to not own a car. Next slide, please. Per the 2021 Kinder Houston Area Survey and 2021 State of Housing in Harris County and Houston report, a majority of respondents preferred to live in smaller home with more nearby amenities instead of preference for more space while working from home. So this image clearly shows that there is an increase in the preference to live closer by to their workplace and prefer to live close to the activities centers and workspaces. Before we move on, I wanted to take a pause and move on. Before we move on to the proposed recommendations, I want to pause and ask if there are any questions so far.
Thank you, Savita. So everyone, before we start with the Q&A, I wanted to remind everyone that, you know, the purpose of this committee is we're doing a couple of things. We're trying to create greater density and more housing options while keeping communities together. So we're not trying to cut corners to make it, you know, easier for developers or anything else. The whole idea is to create more housing options. And that might be, you know, these accessory dwelling units and of course, these smaller homes and on potentially smaller lots. So I want to make sure that everyone understands what our final goal here is to accomplish is to create more and varied housing options for Houston residents. So let me open the floor to questions. Subcommittee members, if you would raise your hand, we'll start calling on you. Anyone?
I'll present the proposed recommendations after this brief break, but anyone, if you have any questions.
I don't see anyone.
Okay.
Let's hurry, go forward. Savita.
Okay, I guess we're ready for the recommendations.
Scott Kubler just raised his hand.
Who did?
Scott Kubler.
Scott Kubler.
Sorry, guys.
Scott, go ahead.
So I actually brought this up. A Kinder did a study that was just released recently discussing this very issue. And again, I'm only here representing the Super Neighborhood Alliance. And I got some pushback from some colleagues with concerns regarding that we make these modifications and allow ADUs and it'll increase the tax base associated with the different properties, which is a benefit to the city as well as increasing the population capacities within the city. But then the conversation turned and became a counterpoint of saying, okay, well, it's great that we potentially have this, but over time, these things may potentially get dilapidated. People may not be able to use them for the capacity they want to use them for. And now I've got an increased tax basis that I've got to pay on my primary residence, which includes the ADU, and there will be no reduction in that. Are we potentially creating a burden on the taxpayer by allowing and creating the opportunities for these ADUs that may not turn into be the panacea that we would like for them to be?
That is an interesting comment. I would like to say that it is possible, it could happen, but it could happen even if it is a single home and not just an ADU, or if it is any other structure. I'm not sure if we will be able to control that in terms of development regulations.
I mean, so Scott, I understand your point. I guess, you know, to use a terrible analogy, I mean, if you're house poor, if you buy a house that you can't afford, you know, you're going to find yourself in a bad place, you know. So I don't know. I don't know that we even have a metric that we could even go back, or enough history that we could go back and look at someone else, some other city situation, and say, well, that worked or that didn't work. I think this whole idea of adding ADUs in California is the most recent example, and San Diego specifically. I don't know that it's been in place long enough for us to have any kind of insight into that.
And I don't know that we're going to have a solution to this. It was an interesting point that came up in discussion.
It's a fair question. Yeah,
it is. And California is a challenging one to look at because you're looking at an entirely different socioeconomic environment when you're looking at that. So I'm not trying to stop the conversation. The purpose that we have these subcommittees is to be able to have these discussions. So I want to bring it up. It was a point of discussion amongst the alliance, and so I wanted to throw it out there.
Absolutely. Thank you
for that.
Certainly something to keep in mind. Tammy, I don't see any other hands raised. Do you?
I do not, sir.
All right, then. By the way, just a reminder, if you are not a subcommittee member, please sign up to speak, ask a question via the chat, or actually put your information in there that you want to speak at the end of the meeting. So Curtis Davis.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Davis.
Just a quick point. Yeah, just a quick point in response to the question. I think that if you look at cities that have current owner-occupied multifamily housing, what you'll find is that housing is generally well cared for over time. And if it is dilapidated, there are general economic conditions in the overall district or the city that are driving that rather than the individual forces. So I can point to cities like Worcester, Massachusetts that have experienced a great renaissance in the triple family house type. Boston has been consistent with stabilizing that over the past 20, 30 years. And I think it's a concern, but it's a general concern in not on the individual property in terms of overall impact, but in a district that's being impacted by larger economic forces rather than the individual problems that one might have in a single household.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. You know what? And it just occurred to me, I do have a personal deal. I used to have a duplex some years ago, and when I went to sell it, I thought I would get the same price per square foot that a single family home would get. I was surprised to learn that it was a good 35% less than the value of a single family dwelling. So I thought I was going to make an extra $100,000 on that property, and nope, didn't happen. So just so you know, I don't know that the price point between, you know, rentals, duplexes, fourplexes, I think it's actually in our city lower than single family per square foot. So there might already be a built-in savings there that maybe we haven't considered. All right, I don't see any more hands raised. Anyone, Tammy?
Nothing on my list.
Okay, then Savita, let's continue, please.
Okay, great. So with all the information and data that we have looked at in the previous slides, let's move on to the recommendation. So our recommendation is to remove the size limit for detached secondary units, similar to the attached units. Parking will be based on the secondary dwelling unit size, regardless of whether it is attached or detached. So mainly 2 off-street parking spaces are for the first single unit, the first unit. And whenever someone decides to add a second unit, then the parking will be based on the size of that second unit. So if the second unit is less than or equal to 1,000 square feet, then there is no additional parking required. Attached or detached, doesn't matter. Now, if the size of the second unit being introduced is 1,000 to 1,200 square feet, then there is an additional parking space that must be provided. If the size of the second unit is larger than 1,200 square feet, then there is need for 2 additional spaces. The parking requirement, the minimum parking requirement, is not needed if the property is close to or in the proximity of other modes of transit. Now, just to remind, the limitation will be there on the number of curb cuts per lot. So there is a restriction on only 1 curb cut per lot while developing the property in this manner. Next slide, please. These proposed recommendations will help us increase the variety of home options, more flexibility in developing the property based on individual needs, and it will help us address the need for units with no parking or reduced parking. Data shows that about 50% of the population has no cars or 1 car, and the parking cost increases the cost of housing. So this will help address some of those needs. It will help incentivize smaller units. Based on the demographic data, we see that there is need for smaller homes due to the smaller households. It provides equity for Houstonians. It also allows property owners to build net worth, and it will help preserve permeable area on the property. Next slide, please. When I mentioned that there will be no parking minimums for either unit when the property is in close proximity to transit, the question may be, how close? What is proximity? So here I'm trying to show that you may remember that during the preliminary discussions on this topic, we were looking at eliminating parking minimums, or basically market-based parking, within quarter mile of other modes of transit, like let's say high frequency bus, rail, bike paths along bike paths, and bike stations. Those are the things, and park and rides is something, transit stations is what we discussed. However, according to the Federal Highway Administration's pedestrian safety guide for transit agencies, most people are willing to walk for 5 to 10 minutes or approximately half mile to a transit stop. Also, according to National Institute of Health, the distance individuals are willing to walk to transit appears to be much higher than the frequently cited rule of thumb of quarter mile, and it is close to half a mile. Several other studies clarify that quarter mile is appropriate for standard limited bus service, while high frequency bus and rails are served by a walkshed of half mile or more. Therefore, staff is proposing that committee consider no parking minimums within half mile of high frequency bus stops, rail stations, park and rides, and transit stations, as well as within quarter mile from high comfort bikeways and bike stations. In the image, you can see an area which is bounded by Ella Boulevard and 16th North Loop and Antwine. In here, the wider width of blue that you see is a buffer from the high frequency bus stops, which is half mile. And in between Antwine and Ella, north of 16, you see that's narrower area that is depicting the quarter mile, because that's a high comfort bike path. And there is bike stations in the vicinity. The circles represent that. So we will identify on the map these buffer areas, which will be the areas where the parking can be decided based on the need of the developer or need of the property owner. So essentially, it's called the market-based parking. And city will not have any minimums. This is in alignment with recommendations in various plans like Plan Houston, Resilient Houston, and Climate Action Plan, as well as supports the public investments city and metro are making in public transportation. I would like to note that city not requiring parking minimums does not preclude the developers or property owners from providing parking within their developments. It provides more variety and opportunity to address various needs of the market. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'm trying to do a side-by-side of the current and the proposed rules. In green is the identified portion that is changing. And looking at the recommendations, there are some questions that we already encountered while discussing these topics within our team. So I'm going to go to the next slide and come back to this again come back to this slide. So can we do the next slide, please? Okay, so here are some questions that we encountered while discussing this topic. I'll go through them. What if I'm only building one unit on one lot? Then what is the parking requirement? Currently, ordinance requirement is 2 spaces per one single family unit. That will be, and so the parking will be 2 spaces per the unit. That will be part of future discussions, and we will, in future, while discussing small lot developments, we will talk about when somebody is proposing a small unit, how much the parking should be. But currently, it's 2 spaces for one unit. What if I'm building 2 small 1,000 square feet homes? In that case, one unit will need 2 spaces and the second unit will not need any. So essentially, it's 1 space per unit. What if someone wants to subdivide the lot and sell the back portion of the unit? That's a great question. With today's discussion on secondary dwelling units, we're only talking about 2 units on one lot. If someone decides to subdivide, they can do so with a flag lot design, and that also will be part of our future discussions on small lot developments. How do we know which one is secondary unit, and is there any difference? No, there is no difference on which one is called secondary. Essentially, per definition, a single family lot can have 2 units, and the portion about secondary dwelling unit can be removed because now there is no size limit of 900 square feet. So whichever one you want to call it secondary is fine. The concept of main unit and accessory unit is not needed anymore after these changes. The last question. This proposal is still recommending 2 spaces each for a duplex. We can go back to the previous slide, please. This proposal is still recommending 2 spaces each for a duplex. That is the current requirement anyway. So what's the difference? Current ordinance requires that duplexes provide 2 parking spaces each for the units regardless of the size of the unit. However, with the proposed recommendations, attached unit, however, we are recommending that whether the unit is attached or detached, the parking spaces be based on the size of the units. So, for example, if today there is an attached unit of or a secondary unit that is attached of 900 square feet, that is still 2 parking spaces. However, in the changed rules, because it's 900 less than 1,000, there is no additional parking required. So that is a change. With that, I'm ready for questions, and I'm going to keep this slide on for you to ponder on and ask questions.
All right, then. Thank you, Savita. All right, so let me open up the floor to those of you that are on the subcommittee to answer questions. And Tammy, will you handle this for us today?
Of course.
This afternoon? Thank you.
Neil Dyckman is first, then Peter Friedman.
Thank you. Neil.
I think this is fantastic. I'd like to understand a little bit on why the curb cut limit was added. Yeah. And I think there's been a number of, we've seen a number of instances where the both an alley facing and non-alley facing lots where there would have been more than one curb cut already there for a duplex unit. I think I see no reason a second unit needs parking at all. To be honest, I think you could relax point 1 and 2. We see huge demand for, for 1 and 0 car residents, especially in that second or third unit on a property. So I think you could even consider relaxing that further if you wanted. This change would have, I've got a project that tied up for 2 years waiting on this exact thing because the second unit was a couple hundred square foot too big. I think this is a huge, hugely positive move. But and then on the frequency, on the distance bit, it's unclear to me that distance is needed from mass transit. The residents that we'd have that don't have a car, to be honest, I think a lot of them are using Uber. It's high frequency as needed. They're not using normal commute patterns. So even distance may not be a need for at least some portion of the housing the housing demographic now.
Okay, thank you so much. Tammy, did you say that Peter Friedman was next?
Yes, and then Mike.
And I show Mike Dishberger. Great.
Correct.
So Peter, go ahead.
Thank you. I really do like these rules. I think it's a good step in the right direction. I also had a question about the curb cut. That makes sense. I think on smaller lots, you don't want to restrict the amount of possible street parking. So I understand the concept behind it, but we do have a lot of like duplexes or multi unit lots that are on corners, and it kind of makes sense to have a access point on each street when you have a setup like that. Or let's say you had a bigger lot, a 10,000 or 15,000 square foot lot. I would hate to limit that to a single curb cut. Thank you.
Savita, is there a provision for that? Again, we discussed the whole idea that the curb cut would be 12. The driveway itself could expand within, the lot. But that's a good question about a corner lot. Would there be some provision for a variance in that case?
That's a good point. I want to elaborate a little bit on why we put the restriction of 1 curb cut per lot. And the concerns that I hear are also true. And we will think about a little bit more. But the reasoning is, imagine a 5,000 square feet lot today. And what we are seeing is 2 front loader lots with 25 feet wide fronting on the street, which is essentially 2 driveways. So if we allow the same concept of 2 units on 1 property and they are allowed to do 2 driveways, that recommendation is against our goal of not having too many driveways on the property to the street, or too many intersections with the pedestrian traffic. So that was the logic behind restricting that we can have 1 curb cut serving 2 properties. I actually had pictures to show what I'm talking about. Unfortunately, they didn't make the slides. But that was the reason why we chose that we want to limit the number of curb cuts on the property. The corner lot definitely brings up a good point. So that is something that I want to take a second look at.
And by the way, should this pass City Council as written, so to speak, as presented, there would there be an opportunity for a variance request?
I think so.
I would think so. That seems like a standard procedure.
Except this may be a definition, so that's a legal question.
Okay.
Part
Let's
of it
investigate.
in the definition,
Let's investigate
but yes.
other options. Should this pass as written? Shall we say? I want to make sure that there are options for a little bit of variability, so we don't have a completely hard and fast rule. So just take a look at that as far as our language, and then we can address that next time. So Dipti, before I call on Mike Dishberger, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, Chair Garza, thank you. This is Dipti Mathur. I believe that, we may, because we are not at all close towards writing the ordinance yet, we can write it the way we want at the time, I guess. So yes, I think a variance provision may be possible, but I think where we are going with these kind of rules is it will be a bunch of rules together, piled up together. So to not separate them. So if you are actually doing 1 unit that is 1,000 square feet on an ADU, you must meet only one curb cut. But I think what was just brought up about corner lots and large size lots may be something that we should look at. But the idea is to improve walkability and reduce the intersection of walkers on the sidewalk and the cars intersecting with the sidewalk. So decrease the probability of accidents. So that is reasoning for one curb cut. But we'll look into the other 2 points. Thank you.
All right, Mike Tischberger, go ahead, sir.
Again, I think this is a great thing. We've been working on this for about a year, and the corner lot is interesting. I didn't think about it till now either. And maybe you limit the size of if you do maybe one curb cut per street, if you're on a corner, and you have 12 to 15 on your proposal, and maybe you say the number is 12 feet for those. Unfortunately, the city requires a 12-foot in-turn, and there's some cases to be made for doing 8-foot in-turns, but the city public works does not allow that. That would be another option. And hey, there's give and take in this. I'm a builder. I like doing these detached garages, and this is going to really help out on that situation. The people that do duplexes, my comment there is maybe this 1,200 where you have to go to 2 parking places gets moved up a little bit, maybe to 1,400. Still makeable. I just know I don't do duplexes, but I know builders that do. And 12 might be a little small to go to that second parking place. Again, this is all give and take. Overall, this is a fantastic thing. You're going to really increase the number of ADUs in Houston with this. I just know you are. There's people waiting to do this kind of work. So congratulations on it. Thanks.
Thank you. So in this image, I'm trying to show that it is possible to have that one driveway and have the unit in the back. And next slide, please. Devin. 71. In this example, if you look at the structure, and the purposes of the pictures is only to learn from them and not to criticize, but the bottom picture with the duplex with 2 driveways, this is what we were trying to avoid. And also the left image on the bottom is also something that the entire frontage is all driveway, and that is something we would like to not have. So, but I do understand about the corner lot, so we'll take a look.
All right, thank you, Savita. Let's go to Scott Kubler and then Lisa Clark. Scott.
We can go back to the other slide, Devin. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Sorry. Again, representing the Super Neighborhood Alliance, I want to actually say, again, I'm thrilled that we're having these discussions because I want to counter everything that Neil Dykeman said. Well, I mean, it comes down to the fact that the reason why we have these requirements for our different parking spaces on the lot side is to keep the cars from being parked on the street. And I heard everything he said, and in 10 years from now, if we all get rid of our cars and we're all doing Uber because they're all driverless vehicles, okay, then we can readdress that conversation. But as of now, most people have vehicles. And in fact, I'm concerned about just the opposite of what he said with regards to access to public transit, because there's bus stops everywhere. And so you could take that aspect and go, well, they have access to bus stops, so I'm not going to put parking spaces in. I think the numbers that you have here are very appropriate and will serve to try and remove the vehicles from being parked on the streets.
Okay. Tammy.
Lisa Clark, then Curtis Davis.
Thank you. Lisa. Lisa? Lisa, you may be
Sorry, a
muted.
little bit of technical difficulty there. Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
I think this is great. I think the committee's done a good job and staff has done a good job getting this to this point. The purpose is, yes, to get the cars off the street, but to also open the streets up for more parking. You know, with not allowing as many curb cuts, now you've got some parking space. The recycle and trash trucks aren't hitting vehicles while they're trying to pick trash up because they're squeezed in everywhere. So I think this helps so many things in the city. And I agree that the examples Savita gave, they're great examples of what we don't really want. We don't want just driveways. We don't want that dangerous pedestrian action. And I agree with the corner lots, but I also think we really need to think about the lot size. I live in an area where there's a bunch of really large lots, and I can see numerous people up here that would love to do these ADUs, but they may need that second curb cut because their lot is so large. They're not necessarily a corner lot, but they are a large lot. And so we need to consider what is the true maximum size to limit to just one curb cut and not have to go through a variance process every single time. Because I do think when you start getting up to, these 10, 15, 18,000 square feet lots, they're not going to, most of them are not going to be able to work well with several ADUs with just one driveway. So that's my concern. But overall, this is great and everyone's done a great job.
All right, thank you. I see Curtis Davis and then Sam.
Colin Scarf just raised his hand. I didn't know if you wanted to respond to Ms.
Colin.
Clark.
Before we go further, Colin, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say it's not unusual for cities to have spacing requirements for driveways. The city probably already has them, but so, one solution to the issue is you set a metric that says you can't have, a driveway any closer than another driveway, so that larger lots would get an extra driveway.
That's an excellent point.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I don't think we have that today. That would be something that would be worthwhile looking into seriously. So I've got Curtis Davis and then Sandy Stevens.
Just to echo everyone, the staff has done a fantastic job on putting this together. This is normally eye-glazing information, and you've done a really great job in this presentation to make this all plain and clear. My point is similar to the point that Colin just made, a slightly different take. Rather than just the total lot size, also the linear footage of frontage could also be part of that formula to address the provision of more than one curb cut per lot. So a corner lot would automatically accommodate 2 curb cuts if the linear footage available for a curb cut was taken into account in the provisions.
All right. Sandy, before we go forward, I see that Public Works, Richard Smith has his hand raised. Richard, did you want to interject?
Yeah, just we do have spacing requirements for driveways. Right now they're set that there should be a minimum of 20 feet between the edges of driveways, and we do limit them to, especially for commercial, approximately every 170 feet. So you get one driveway for the first 170 feet, although we don't quite follow that to the T on their designs. So, but there are some standards in the design manual for those.
But does that apply to residential?
I believe it does. I believe it just says that you can get at least one driveway for every 170. We have to grant at least a driveway for every 170 feet. And we do allow a second driveway because we have a lot of circular driveways. But again, that's more on an appeals basis or case by case basis. So yes, we would look at second driveways, but we wanted to look at the spacing being about 20 feet. And I know we don't have that because, I'm sorry, about 10 feet for residential between the driveways. So the radius is, sorry, 20 feet for commercial, 10 feet for residential, because we look at the radiuses. If we have 5-foot radiuses, 2 radiuses would be a 10-foot separation.
Okay, I would really like to see more of that, because I don't think we're doing that, in townhome communities. Okay, well, thank you. Sandy Stevens, apologies.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, please, Savita.
Thank you for that information from Richard Smith from Public Works. We definitely want to make sure that one of our goals is also to reduce the number of curb cuts and taking away the pedestrian rail. And so definitely we will look at establishing a distance between the curb cuts, especially if the curb cuts are both on the same property. So the ideas that were presented are great ideas that we will take a look at the curb cuts portion.
Okay, thank you. Sandy, thank you for holding on. Go right ahead, please.
No problem. Thank you for allowing me to speak yet again about the same thing. I do commend the staff. I think there's some wonderful ideas that are in this proposal. The concern that I have is we still drive cars, and despite elimination of required parking, or because of the elimination of required parking, the neighborhood I live in will have additional parking pressure put on it, and that's a concern. I think I've said before, and I'll say again, you can't get to a grocery store in my neighborhood without a car, or, I mean, in some instances, I suppose Uber would be the option, but even though that we are bordered by 2 light rail stations on either end of the neighborhood, even if you get to the light rail station, it's hard to get to a grocery store. So I just want to say again, there is concern about eliminating these parking requirements completely, which would happen in my neighborhood, of course. So thanks for allowing me to express that concern.
Of course. Thank you, Sandy. All right. I see. All right. Are there any other subcommittee members?
Jeff Kaplan.
Jeff Kaplan, go right ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to say to that point that, I think that related to this, if there is pushback on parking, I think that, these neighborhoods that have seen investment in micromobility and transit-oriented development, especially within the TOD ordinance, those neighborhoods, I think, are seeing the built environment and commerce adapt to this sort of proximity. And I think that we do need code that looks at proximity. I mean, one of the projects that we're doing right now, we have a micro-urban grocer that is specifically going into food deserts in burgeoning neighborhoods where an HEB won't go in, and they're catering to people within a mile, and they're going to carry under 500 SKUs, and they're going to price low and price high with with local farm produce. But they're if successful, half the customers will be using food stamps and half will be buying from local farms that you would get at the farmers market. And it's a 700 square foot grocery store. You order ahead of time. But I think that if our code does reflect the notion of proximity, I think there's a huge demand for people that do want to live in these neighborhoods car free, and maybe they use cars once a week or once every few weeks, but other times they'll bike or they'll use Uber, they'll car share. Whereas if you're in a suburban neighborhood that doesn't have a tight grid and doesn't have mobility, it's just harder.
All right, thank you. Subita, we are at 4:58 for a 5 o'clock ending, and we are not nearly close to being done. Do you have a recommendation?
Yes, sir. My recommendation is that we conclude with this topic and then go straight to homework activities and conclude the meeting. We will take up the small lot preliminary ideas next time.
All right, let's do that. So are we going to hand this over to Lynn?
Before we do, Mr. Chair, if I may,
please.
Overall, in essence, from the comments, what I heard is that we have to take a second look at the number of the 1 curb cut per lot and see if we can establish some criteria of corner lots or the lot size, is what I'm hearing. And there are certain concerns about parking that we have heard. And one point I would like to make is the kind of development we see today is a result of the rules that were prepared when I was born, almost 40, 50 years ago. So what we do today will impact the kind of development is for the future. So we have to remember the change that's happening. And also the rules are promoting car-free living, and not that we want the streets to be filled up with cars. It could happen, but also the property owners can decide to put parking spaces. It's just that the minimum parking will not be required by the city. I just want to emphasize that and really appreciate great comments from the committee on this topic.
All right, thank you. All right, so who's next on this revised agenda?
The next item is Lynn Henson, who will talk to us about the homework activities in the next meeting date.
All right, Lynn.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Garza and committee members. There are new articles posted on letstalkhouston.org/livable-places. The first is entitled Testing New Ideas with Cottage Courts. This is included in the Public Square Journal produced by Congress for the New Urbanism. It includes information about how adaptable the cottage courtyard design is. Robert Stoutville, the author, discusses how this missing middle type can be placed in urban, suburban, or rural settings and can be included as for sale or as rental units. Cottage courts are wonderful developments with open space. It can include group parking and can test new design ideas, methods, and markets. The units sit on a small footprint and are very inviting to people and families. The second article is Micro Townhouses Designed for Flexibility. It is also included in the Public Square Journal. The article is about the micro townhouses and it lists numerous advantages. Robert Stoutville discusses how the design enables homeownership, is easier for builders to finance, provides green and common spaces, lends to available street parking, and is customizable based on the needs of the homeowner. He describes the units in this article as high-quality urbanism. I urge you to go on to letstalkhouston.org/livable-places to find both of these articles and to be able to read more. Unless there are any questions, I'd like to turn it back over to Ms. Bandy.
Thank you, Lynn. All right, Suvita.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Lynn Henson, for that information on the articles. They're beautiful articles, and I, especially before the next topic, it will help to read those to learn more about what's happening in terms of trends. The next meeting is on March, I'm trying to find the date. It's March 8th from 3 to 5 p.m. So please join us to discuss more proposed recommendations and preliminary ideas. With that, we are ready for public comments.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So far, this is a really, really good meeting, and I apologize that we are running overtime at this point in time. Our instructions for public comments are 2 minutes per speaker. Again, *6 if you're connected to a phone. Click on your microphone button to turn on and off. We do have a number of speakers, 9 or 10. And so as per usual, typically we take the information from our speakers and do not necessarily answer questions at this time. So let me just say, if you are here and on a telephone, we'll take your questions and you can call Planning Commission Suvita Bandy tomorrow at, I believe the number, Suvita, is 832-393-6600.
Yes, sir.
And you can ask for Miss Bandy, and she will have your questions and will hopefully be in a position to give you answers. Or you may put your contact information in the chat, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible with answers to your questions. So, Tammy, are you handling public comment speakers today?
I'm not. Tamara is.
Tamara, there you are. Thank you for that clarification. Tamara, are you ready?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The first speaker we have is Kevin Strickland.
All right, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Should I spell out the last names too?
Please.
Okay, it's Strickland.
Okay, Mr. Strickland.
Hi there. I spoke last time and I wanted to pick up the thread. Everything we're talking about at the top of the program, Deputy Director Osland talked about walkability and livability, are really two sides of the same coin. I would encourage the committee to remember that 50% of Houston is unwalkable. And so for the work that you're doing, we must solve walkability. It's not an option, it's a must-have. I'll give you some examples of things that I think maybe the commission might be able to tackle. One, right-of-way encroachment. Once you see it, when there aren't sidewalks, right-of-way encroachment is everywhere. The city is very lax at reclaiming it. Once a homeowner sees a sidewalk go in next door, if they don't have a sidewalk, I guarantee you they act to take over their right-of-way. You can see this everywhere. In addition, the builders are encouraged to leave those boulders in the right-of-way. That practice needs to end. And once they're there, they're very difficult to get rid of. Second, broken sidewalks is probably a funding issue, but I would ask the committee to keep in mind that unless we fix the broken sidewalks, people are not going to be able to reach their public transportation safely. Lastly, sidewalk exception. I think this is left over from walkable places, and it's a big loophole. Hundreds of sidewalk exceptions have been granted since 2020. Any gains we make at filling sidewalks are lost because of the sidewalk exception. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. We appreciate your hanging on to the bitter end. Okay, Tamara, who's our next speaker?
The next speaker I have is George Frey, F-R-E-Y.
Mr. Frey.
Hi, Livable Places.
Go right ahead, sir. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My comment request is more to Roman and Suvita and the planning department. I'm a big fan of Livable Places, but sometimes it's very difficult to get some of this information and understand what else is out there and available. Earlier in the call, you guys talked about this new program, conservation program, and a lot of it is very similar to other programs that are out there, especially Walkable Places, and I'm sure there's others. But for me, as just an ordinary citizen, it's very difficult to navigate all of the websites and understand all the different programs and the requirements. And even listening to all the commissioners here wonder what are all the rules and how do they compare to other programs. It definitely is very overwhelming. And I request that you be able to summarize this and show all of this on your websites so that we can more easily apply for it, just to add the transparency so we can start applying for these things and have some sort of a one-stop shop to understand what all of these programs are. I live within SNC 14, and as part of SNC 14, I'd like to definitely be a part. I don't think we qualify for the conservation, but there are some of the aspects that I definitely would like to be a part of, and I think a lot of more than 51% of my neighbors would like to see it as well. But I've submitted a couple requests via email to Walkable Places, and I'm just looking to find out how to proceed with it to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frey. We appreciate your comments. Thank you. All right, Tamara, who's number 3?
The next speaker I have is Amy Van Boekel, V-A-N-B-K-E-L.
All right. Ms. Van Boekel, are you there?
I'm here.
Go right ahead, please.
I think I need to learn more about this organization before I comment. I just had some questions about flooding and displacement, but I think I'll read over the materials and come back next time.
All right, and if you have a pen, really, you can always talk to the planner of the day if you have specific questions about a specific area, and you just call planning department and ask to speak to the planner of the day. They can probably give you some direction. All right, our next speaker.
Okay, great, thanks.
Of course.
The next speaker we have is William Hamilton, Hamilton.
Okay. Mr. Hamilton. We're not hearing you.
I think he posted in the chat that he had to leave.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry about that, Mr. Hamilton. Our next speaker.
The next speaker I have is T. DeBose, DeBose.
Okay.
All right.
DeBose, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Garza, and to all the other committee members. I'm Tanya DeBose. I am with the Independence Heights community. I first of all want to thank the planning department, Roman and his team, for putting together the language for the conservation district. Communities like Independence Heights are very historic, have very few tools by which they can use to protect themselves, as well as to really chart a path for the neighborhood character that we want to see. As a fifth generation descendant of the people who started this community, what I see every day is new townhomes, front-loaded garages coming up in our communities where people drive in their garage and we never see them, and then the fence goes up in the front of the home. This is a community where it's full of front porches. People know each other, they know their neighbors, and that's how we like it. I believe that a tool like a conservation district would allow us to be able to develop with our new neighbors and everyone an equitable way of living in a community where everyone can feel like they're at home. And so I just want to commend the staff on that and let them know that we in Independence Heights, we support this conservation district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bose. We appreciate your comments and your addition to this meeting. Our next speaker.
The next speaker I have is Randall Baxley, Baxley.
Mr. Baxley?
That's me, Randall Baxley.
All right, go right ahead, sir.
I like both of these things, the conservation district and the ADUs coming forward, and limiting parking, minimum parking. The street parking does need to be addressed in some way as well. Once we go to a minimum, you don't want to go to a minimum and then have everybody with 3 cars parking on the street. The other thing was that as we look back in time and look at Bel Air and West University, and then 6th Ward, and the townhouses were built, and then they decided we don't like the townhouses coming in destroying our neighborhood, but they continue to destroy the neighborhood. And here in the near north side, we're sort of next. And the townhouses have begun, and I'm not sure how that will affect the ability to have conservation districts in areas that already do not meet, have 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 units on a lot.
I'm sorry, is that the end of your comment, sir?
Yes, that was the comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so very much, Mr. Baxley. Our next speaker.
The next speaker we have is Dan Asbury, Asbury.
All right. Are you there? Asbury?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, this is Danny Asbury L. And I want to support the conservation neighborhood because, I just want to make sure that people have the tools, even when they don't have the ability, So basically, I want to support those who don't always have the tools to always preserve their own neighborhoods and their own cultures and development. I recently just came from the Middle East, and I saw them use the conservation concept with their people, and it was very wonderful. Everybody kind of got what they wanted. Everybody felt at home where they were, and I'm born and raised in Houston, especially on the north side over there by Homestead, and I know I kind of know what developers kind of can do, and so I support the conservation community efforts all day long.
All right. Well, thank you so very much. We appreciate that, and you're sticking in for our meeting. Our next speaker.
The next speaker we have is Alan Watkins, W-A-T-K-I-N-S.
Mr. Watkins, are you with us? Mr.
Good
Watkins?
afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. My name is Alan Watkins with the Houston Housing Collaborative. ADUs came up in one of our recent general monthly meetings. And one of the things that came up specifically, the question was raised is around affordability. For example, if you have a current family homeowner who lives in a low-income neighborhood who hears about ADUs, but aren't able necessarily to afford them, how can they afford it? Is it possible to potentially reduce some of the costs? I don't know, maybe that's a developer conversation, but are there ways in which costs can be reduced for low-income families who would like to put an ADU on their existing property? That's the question. And if someone can circle back, that would be awesome.
Right. Thank you so much for your question. We'll see about getting some information to you. And our next speaker?
The last speaker I have is Mark Williamson, W-I-L-L-I-A-M-S-O-N.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Williamson.
Good afternoon, all. I'm very excited about this conservation district, but I do think that there was a lot of confusion about the quantification of the qualifications for doing the application. Tracts versus lots versus property owner rights and minority property owner rights and resident rights. I think that needs to be really clarified to be fair to all of the constituents there. And some of it conflicts, some of the things that people did from memory conflicted with what I know of the proceedings in other venues. Also, skipping forward to the ADU size and the driveway issue, another feature that works well in some of our neighborhoods is twinned driveways where adjacent properties have no arc between two driveways. It effectively is one wide curb cut instead of having to dance around multiple curb cuts. It provides additional space for trash cans and for parking. That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. All right. Do we have anyone else signed up to speak or anyone else who's been listening in who would like to address the subcommittee?
I have no one else signed up to speak.
Okay, and hearing none, we are done with public comment, and I will now thank you all for having been part of this meeting. We appreciate your involvement and your notes and your information, and I will now adjourn this meeting. Thank you so very much. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to committee members for the important points of discussion. Appreciate it.